Yeah, so Gregor, if you want to share some thoughts.
Yes, so I will be the moderator. It is quite simple. You can write questions in the chat, and we try to keep check of these on these. And then there will only be 2 questions for each presenter, but then there will be a part of this kitchen talk that will take place after lunch. So that will be more of a general discussion, so you can also save your questions for then. And now we might have to switch the order if we don't get the first presenter back into the, yeah, here she is. So I would like to ask Adinda to start talking, and my question to you is, what made you interested in studying e-scooters in the first place?
Okay, thank you, Gregor.
And then present yourself very briefly, please.
Okay, so yeah, hi everyone. My name is Adinda. I'm recently graduated from the Sustainable Urban Planning and Design program at KTH. And my interest about micromobility is started when I realized that, there are so many new transportation emerge in urban area. And at first, I kind of thinking that maybe e-scooter or any other form of micromobility is just an impact from one an emerging business of a startup. But then I realized that it also has an impact to the urban situation. It has so many protests, and then it's kind of impacted the public spaces. And then there's some kind of a lot of a plan from the company to actually expand the business. And then I'm thinking that, okay, so when they want to expand this business in the future, so we need to actually realize that it has an impact, and we need to actually look for some kind of a problem and look some kind of a potential problem, a potential solution, and then how the city could do to manage this issue. So I think that is one of the first thing that has come to my mind and then I realized that, okay, I want to analyze this further, and then combining my background in architecture and urban design with the planning and the policy. So that's why I'm working about this topic in my master's thesis.
Okay, that was a good start. So please present your study.
Okay, so I'm going to. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Minimize the
okay,
box, right?
Yes, so I'm going to.
Oh, it's good.
Put it here, so it's not going to disturb. Okay, so the title of my master's thesis is the impact of e-scooter in Stockholm public spaces, and this thesis is a collaboration with the VTI. So yeah, so in the recent years, the various new options of transportation emerge, and one of its form is the micromobility services, with electric scooter or e-scooter as the most popular one. The adoption rate of the e-scooter services in the market showed an impressive number since its first appearance around 2017. E-scooter claim could benefit the public and urban area, such as lessen the traffic congestion and parking problems, offering fast and convenient mode of transportation, and also offering a transportation that have a less emission. But then we can see that in many media and then in the online news that there are so many protests that raised by the inhabitants regarding some effect that caused by e-scooter. The dockless concept that adopted by the service then impeded public spaces and caused harm to not only the e-scooter rider itself, but also pedestrian and specific group of people, such as elderly and disabled. On the other hand, there are also many protests regarding the effect that caused by e-scooter in public spaces area, which some claim as a messy situation. So many cities also struggling on how to regulate this new phenomenon while also providing a sufficient infrastructure to it. And then how about Sweden and Stockholm? We can know that there are also so many e-scooter companies that is present in the Stockholm as the capital of Sweden. And we also know that as one of the country in Northern Europe, Sweden also has a long-established commitment towards implementing and promoting sustainable mobility. In October 2019 itself, it was reported that there were 9,000 vehicles of e-scooters on Stockholm street, even though the current pandemic situation affected its number right now. In one of the surveys conducted in 2019, 44% of respondents claim that e-scooter is annoying and or unsafe. Some of the causes were the improperly parked e-scooters. Another issue is regarding the increased number of e-scooter accidents from 2 accidents in 2018 to 132 accidents until August 2019, based on the report released by the city of Stockholm. Furthermore, many also complain about the behavior of e-scooter users, which mainly described as reckless and irresponsible. And then we can go to the aim and objective of this master thesis. So the thesis will going to investigate how the presence of e-scooters affected the sidewalk environment around Stockholm, captured from the experience of pedestrians and e-scooter users, and also some experts that have an interest towards an e-scooter issue. There are 3 research questions that I pose in this master thesis, which are, the first is, how do pedestrians experience the accessibility, safety, and comfort of the sidewalk environment with the presence of e-scooters? The second is, how do the e-scooter riders experience the sidewalk environment while using the vehicle? And the last one is, what aspects of sidewalk design could improve the situation for both pedestrians and e-scooter users? And then, are there any ways to develop the sidewalk environment to mitigate potential problems or clash between pedestrian and e-scooter? So, and also I put some kind of a delimitation in the study. For instance, like the study is conducted in Stockholm with a focus in the inner city area. And then the type of the e-scooter that being analyzed is just the shared and the dogless one. And then why Stockholm? In terms of structure and traffic network, since the Middle Ages, Stockholm was formed by a dense stone-built city intended for walking. Later growth of Stockholm's urban form was also affected by the development of new forms of traffic, such as automobile and metro network. The urban mobility strategy released in 2012 was written to make the current transportation system in Stockholm more efficient, while prioritize the use of existing infrastructure, where the city will continue to optimize a limited space to accommodate the movement for people and goods. In parallel, Stockholm also considers improving the value of roads and streets as a vibrant environment that promotes social interaction. Alongside with the city plan, Stockholm also has a Stockholm pedestrian plan to support the urban mobility strategy in terms of attract more people to walk. The sidewalk environment itself plays as an essential role in Stockholm public space. To minimize conflict that occurred with the presence of e-scooters, Stockholm also did some efforts. One of them was a voluntary commitment, outlined the agreement between the city of Stockholm and e-scooter companies. This regulation considers some important aspects, such as how the company should react towards the improperly parked e-scooters. Recently, there was also an initiative that using a crowdsourcing based application to report the incorrectly parked e-scooters named by Fiat Parkera. So it's kind of like an initiative that is coming from the citizen, because they also have some kind of a response to some of the issue that is present because of the e-scooter. And then we can go to the next part, which is some theories that will be used to analyze how e-scooters impacted public space in Stockholm. So the first is I'm using the theoretical framework of the public space in the city under the discipline of architecture, urban design, and landscape architecture. We know that public space is it's a space that is mainly planned and designed to create a relationship between people and space. Public space also understanding as a space that could enhance the value of public life and cities itself. Then as one form of public space, sidewalk environment would be the main form that analyzed in the study. Sidewalk is a unique form of public space because its ability to not only act as a network of movement, but also to provide social activities. Walking is one activity that frequently occurred in this space. Design, but we know that in the current situation, like design and engineering principles, sometimes the lack of understanding that this space needs to be a space that is people-oriented space, which should strengthen the walking experience. And then on the research under the planning and design scope, it could be concluded that a wide range of external factors in the built environment also affected pedestrian walking activity. It is affecting not only the pedestrian decision to conduct a walking activity, but also their experience. So based on the Alfonso model about hierarchy of walking needs, as you can see the triangle here in the presentation, some factors play a more significant role in constructing pedestrian decision to walk. Some aspects on the street and sidewalk contribute to various user perception while walking, and it could be used to evaluate the quality of the environment. This understanding is based on the principle of the environmental psychology. So some theories above will be used to help to answer the research question posed in this thesis. Since e-scooters are also perceived as an external factors on the built environments, their presence will be analyzed further in terms of how it affected an individual willingness to walk and how it has affected their walking experience. The sidewalk design guideline from NACTO, as you can see here in the right side of the presentation, will then be used as the basis for defining the desirable physical characteristic of each sidewalk environments that adapting the presence of e-scooters in a better way.
Okay, here I will ask you a question. It sounds good and it looks good, but we have like 3 more minutes and then 5 minutes for discussion. But if you can use like 7 minutes, and I will ask people to write up their questions for later.
Okay.
So would you like to have 3 more minutes or 7 more minutes?
I think I can use the 7 more minutes.
Yeah, and then I will ask everybody listening to just note down your important questions.
Yes.
As we move on. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then to collecting the data of this research, I'm using 3 different types of methods, which is the observation, survey, and interview. And it's kind of like a combination and like a continuous progress, because something that I found in the observation was also affecting what I put in the survey, and also some kind of a question that I put in the interview. So we can go directly to the result and analysis of the methods. So this thesis, the observation is held in 2 locations. The first is Odengatan and the second one is the Hornsgatan. And of the observation held in February, which was the winter season in the Stockholm. But as we know that in this year, there was no snow ice. So I concluded that the activity of e-scooter and also walking activity could also still taking place in both locations. And then both observation also held before the COVID-19 outbreak. So it's around February, before the city is kind of like being less people in the inner city area. So, and then some kind of a finding that I found is about the streetscape condition, which we can see that the streetscape condition of Odengatan and Hornsgatan is kind of like different. And then I also found some kind of a different condition of the park e-scooters, where, for example, in the Odengatan, the condition of the park e-scooter that mostly present was a park and park well, even though I cannot resist that there are also some kind of a situation where the e-scooter is kind of like laying in the middle of the pavement. And the last one is how the e-scooter user behave, because, for instance, in the Odengatan, I found that some of the e-scooter user also move in the sidewalk area, but then on the Hornsgatan area, where the condition of the streetscape is kind of like different, it's hardly fun to find an e-scooter user moving in the sidewalk area. And then after some kind of a finding that I found in the observation, especially the condition of the park e-scooters, I used these variables to be put in the survey questions and looking for various responses in regard to how it is affecting the pedestrian walking experience. So the survey itself was divided into 2 types, which is the pedestrian survey and e-scooter survey. For the pedestrian survey, I'm focusing on the condition of the park e-scooter and then the perception towards the presence of e-scooter on the sidewalk environment. But for the e-scooter user survey, I'm focusing on the e-scooter parking preferences. And then after I found there are some kind of different variables and then different input from the survey, I kind of like choose like several interesting view. That is some of them is kind of like contradict between each other. And then I choose them to be interviewed further in the in-depth interview. And based on the conversation that I had, I kind of like divided the interview into 6 teams, which, as you can see in the in the presentation, for instance, like the thoughts about the appearance of the e-scooter phenomenon in Stockholm, and then the pro and cons about e-scooter, and then what they think about the concept of e-scooter as a first or last mile mobility, and then etc. So maybe we can go directly to the discussion. So discussion will start on discussing the perspective of the sidewalk environment in both study location and how e-scooter affected the pedestrian and sidewalk environment. The results show that complaints being raised are mainly focusing on how e-scooters impede access for pedestrian and other street user. Meanwhile, the character of the sidewalk environment leads to different pedestrian perceptions toward e-scooters' appearance on it. Some factors are varying. For instance, the width of the sidewalks and the availability of cycle infrastructure. When we divided the sidewalk environment in both location into zones based on the NACTO guideline, as you can see in the images here, it could be seen that different location on park e-scooter cause different access to the pedestrian. For instance, most of the pedestrians complained that e-scooter is affecting their movement if it is located in the pedestrian through zone. And then I also discussing about the I also identified later that the pedestrians not only affected by the park e-scooters, but also the moving one. So the feelings and the perspective of the pedestrian will discuss on the second and the third part, which is, as you can see that, for instance, the pedestrian experience toward park e-scooter, it also have an effect to the comfort aspects, not only just the accessibility of the pedestrian. And even though that we can see that even though they feel that it's a little bit uncomfort, most of them added that the uncomfortable feelings that emerged wasn't affecting their decision to walk in this area. And then for the fourth part of the discussion, we can see that from the e-scooter user perspective, they are mostly considered the readiness of the city infrastructure toward the presence of e-scooter. And then they also give some kind of evaluations toward the cycle infrastructure, since this thing is kind of like considered as the most suitable space to accommodate the moving e-scooter in the current situation. And then for the last one, from the design perspective, it's kind of like we can get some kind of a suggestion that it could be helpful if the city defining sidewalk zone as suggested by NACTO to minimize clash between users in the footpaths. So for instance, if the minimum technical standard of each zone of the sidewalk environment have been defined in the first place, it will be easy to plan and designated parking for e-scooters and which area is suitable to accommodate it. It also could help the planners to determine that e-scooters could be parked in the sidewalk area only if the minimum standards of a pedestrian through zone has been achieved. And then for the last part, which is the conclusion of this thesis, I'm trying to answering 3 research questions that I put in the very beginning. And then for the first one is, how the pedestrian experience the accessibility, safety, and comfort of the sidewalk environment with the presence of e-scooters. It could be concluded that pedestrian experience accessibility, safety, and comfort aspect differently according to the condition of the e-scooter itself. And then the park e-scooter mostly cause the level of comfort of pedestrian decrease, with few condition of park e-scooters also affected the accessibility of the pedestrian movement. But then the moving e-scooters would mostly threaten pedestrian safety feelings, and this condition considered to imperil the willingness of pedestrians to walk. And then for the second research question, how do the e-scooter riders experience the sidewalk environment while using the vehicle? E-scooter users tend to express their concern towards the quality of the cycle lane as part of a sidewalk environment, because as I mentioned earlier before, that they see that this infrastructure is kind of like the most suitable one for the e-scooter being moved instead of the moving in the sidewalk. And then this consideration showed because most of the e-scooter users considered as a pro e-scooter also have a very positive view of e-scooter, and they also tend to avoid conflict with other street users, mostly the pedestrian. And then the last, they say that they expect a better quality of cycle lane to perceive safety while riding the vehicle and avoid conflict, for instance, to another user, for instance, a cyclist. And then for the last research question, we can see that understanding that some sidewalk is not suitable to have a parked e-scooters on it because it will cause trouble to the pedestrian movement could be used in defining the parking management regulation in Stockholm. And then improving the current condition of the city's infrastructure, such as bicycle lanes, could be a suitable option right now. Managing e-scooter user behavior as an essential intervention that the city needs to do. And the last one is an understanding that city's infrastructure, such as sidewalk and street, could adapt to new changes without drastically change the existing physical condition. So I think that is the end of my presentation, and there are some kind of a suggestion for the future research that I think would be interesting if someone wants to learn, wants to analyze more about the micromobility and e-scooter issue in the city. So I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it was a comforting message that we don't need to redesign the city altogether. There are smarter ways to do it. Thank you, Adinda. And I will immediately invite Marcus.
Yeah, thanks, Gregor. Can everyone hear me okay?
You can just present yourself and start.
Okay, sure. I've got a few concerns about the strength of my internet connection. So if anyone who's showing their video at the moment could turn it off, it might help a little bit. Thanks. So I'll just get my slides up.
Okay, it looks
Everyone
good.
see my slides there?
Yes.
That's fine. Okay, so I moved to Stockholm in 2018, in August 2018, to start my master's thesis in master's program in sustainable urban planning and design. And coincidentally, that was the month that e-scooters were first launched into Stockholm by Voi. So I saw them as a new transport mode with potential. And then as I did some research into it, I sort of saw a debate forming around the extent to which they can have a positive impact on environmental indicators or not. So that's why I chose to do my thesis on e-scooters. My thesis was called Dockless Electric Scooters and a Sustainable Mobility Transition in Stockholm. I had a user study. I interviewed a few of the key stakeholders, including representatives from Tier and Lime and a few other people who work in the micromobility sector within the city. I won't present all my findings from that. I'll just go through a quick overview of the findings from the survey, and then a bit of background information as well. So yeah, so this is the presentation schedule. I'm going to do a quick overview of e-scooters in Stockholm. I'm going to show you a few quotes from what the operators claim to have, how operators claim e-scooters impact the city. And then I will show you an environmental impact timeline. And then I'll go through some results from my user survey. So first of all, e-scooters are a successful example of how companies have monetized short journeys on an individual scale, but to a mass market. And they have the potential to be highly profitable. This is exemplified by the vast amounts of money that's been put into the industry in the past few months. Voi Tier have received a $250 million in funding. Voi have secured 160 million, and Bolt are investing 100 million into micromobility in Europe. And they're highly popular in Stockholm. As Adinda was saying, there is as of August last year, there was 9,000 e-scooters in Stockholm. My understanding is that in the summer just gone, there was up to 15,000. So it's a huge new transport mode, nothing compared to the car, but it's growing quickly. And as Adinda went through, they cause problems in cities, particularly involving the impact on public space and safety. But e-scooters have claimed that they have a positive impact in the cities that they operate in. So these are a few of the claims that I took from their website. So Lime is saying that they reduce dependence on the personal automobile. Bird are saying that they make cities more livable by reducing car usage, traffic and carbon emissions. And Voy is saying they reduce air and noise pollution and break traffic gridlock. To the question. So from all these quotes, it seems key that they have to, for them to have a positive impact on the city, they have to shift people away from car use into public onto e-scooters for them to have a positive impact. Otherwise, the other problems like safety and the impact of public space may outweigh these benefits. So I've done a little timeline of the environmental impact of e-scooters. So when Voice first launched in Stockholm, they first had they basically used adapted consumer scooter models. So they were quite flimsy. They didn't last very long. And then, as you can see, that the amount of e-scooters in the city grew. And then there was the first paper was published, to my knowledge anyway, on the life cycle impact of e-scooters. And it found that the global warming potential per kilometre was 126 grams, which was a lot higher than public transport, obviously walking and cycling journeys, and in some levels it was similar to an electric car. The companies, I think that the companies kind of responded to these papers and have really tried to improve their service in terms of the impact it has on the environment. So there's now e-scooters which are specifically designed for the rental market with swappable batteries. And then Voy conducted a study with EY. I'm not sure exactly how that relationship was, but they claimed that it was that their new model when operating in Paris was 37.4 grams of CO2 per kilometre, which is obviously a lot less than the Hollingsworth study. And then now the most up-to-date e-scooter models have swappable batteries. They use dispersed charging networks. They're much more durable. They have integrated helmets and advanced tracking systems, so you can control where people park and where people ride them more. So this is part 2 of my survey. So the overall aim of my survey was to understand how e-scooters were affecting transportation dynamics within Stockholm, and what impact this could have on environmental indicators. So this is just some respondent characteristics. I distributed the survey online. I did it during the spring, so just as COVID was emerging, and there was quite a good response. I had 400 responses. About 240 were stated e-scooter users, and there was a good split between men and women. There was a reasonably good age category distribution, and people were from different parts of the city. So the first thing is modal shift. So the vast majority of e-scooter journeys are replacing, from the survey, we're replacing public transport journeys and walking journeys. So 33% and 47% for all responses. Whilst for people's own car, it was only 4% of the journeys. And when you look at the journeys that weren't affected by COVID, there was only 3% of the journeys were shifting away from private car use. However, there's a lot stronger shift away from taxi and ride-hail journeys, which I think is quite promising. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. So I think it's useful to compare these findings with the findings from other studies, and the general consensus is that in American cities, I assume because they have less developed public transport systems and they use the automobile a lot more, the shift away from the automobile is therefore much greater than it is in Stockholm and other European cities, although there was quite a good shift away from automobile use in Belgium. So I tried to estimate the effect, to calculate what the impact would have been if the impact on CO2 would have been if people had used the other mode instead of using an e-scooter. So then you can compare it to the previous life cycle studies that have been conducted. And generally, I estimated that it was about 64 grams per kilometer shifted away from the original transport modes, which is in between the peer-reviewed studies and the Voy / Ernst & Young study that was conducted. So the debate still goes on as to what the actual CO2 impact is on cities, whether they are reducing CO2. I think ultimately you're going to need a life cycle study conducted independently of the e-scooter companies, so and ideally peer-reviewed. So another thing I looked at was multimodal use. Are people using e-scooters in conjunction with other transport modes? And the overall answer was they are quite a bit. Quite a lot of people are using them with public transport. For 22%. Most people weren't using them with other transport modes. But then I took a look at what I just looked at the journeys that shifted away from that were being used in conjunction with other journeys, and I looked to see if the journeys where an e-scooter was combined with another mode of transport were shifting away from car use. So that's to see if there was enough of an incentive to use a multimodal journey, or not necessarily incentive, but enough, if it was practical enough to use a multimodal journey instead of a car journey. And overall, it seemed like there was just one user out of 77 combined trips that was shifting away from their own car and use public transport with an e-scooter, and were shifting away from their own car. So then another interesting thing about my study was I conducted it just right in the middle of COVID, so the COVID outbreak. So I had a sample of journeys that were from before the COVID outbreak and a sample of journeys that were after. And I did run some tests, and there was a statistically significant difference between the two. And basically there was an 8% shifted away from private car / taxi before COVID-19, but during the pandemic, 17% shifted away from private car / taxi. So it shows that there was a greater chance that that during COVID-19 people were moving away from automobiles as opposed to beforehand. So just a quick summary. So only 4% of e-scooter users shifted away from a private car journey. 10% of journeys shifted away from taxi / ride-hail journeys. The shift away from automobiles is much greater in Stockholm than North American cities. The CO2 impact of the shifted modes is estimated to be between the peer review findings and the EY study. People are using e-scooters as part of multimodal journeys, 22% in conjunction with public transport. Multimodal journeys are unlikely to shift away from private car journeys, and during COVID-19, e-scooters were more likely to shift away from private car / automobile journeys. So what does this mean? E-scooters are, based upon this evidence, are unable to compete with private car journeys on their own. Why I think this is because a lot of car journeys is just impractical to use an e-scooter. You need to pick up food from the shop, or you need to take your kids to school, but also in terms of economic incentives, you've already paid for your car, so why would you then pay to use an e-scooter? But there is a strong substitute for taxi / ride-hail journeys. Why do I think this is because taxi journeys are much more spontaneous, as are e-scooter journeys, so there's just a much more natural substitution, but also you pay at the point of use for taxi and ride-hail journeys and e-scooter journeys, so they're much more comparable. So overall, I would say that e-scooters are unlikely to cause a shift away from ownership on their own, but as part of a multimodal situation, they seem much more likely to. So if, for example, for people stop using their cars for reasons other than an e-scooter, then having e-scooters around will be useful, as then people won't be using taxis or perhaps in the future driverless vehicles and stuff like that.
Thank you. I will intervene here because this seems like almost your last slide, and it was very condensed and nice. You have the discussion and summary here.
Yeah.
Read it. Would you like to open up for one question, or you like to finish just your?
Oh no, I'm happy to take a question. Okay.
But we don't know if there is a question, so you have to speak out loud because I haven't seen a question in the. So you can take your chance. You have 20 seconds from now to raise your hand or speak up.
I have a question.
Yes.
Mia, please.
So you say here in point 3, shift away from automobiles much in Stockholm than in North American cities, but I thought you said exactly the opposite. That
it's much less.
Sorry, have I made a mistake there?
Yeah.
You're missing something. So because I think that you were right in your analysis.
I'll
earlier,
go back to that slide.
To say that e-scooters have potential to shift automobile use in the US more than it has in Stockholm.
No, that's definitely what I meant to say.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll hear more about this from in a second.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mia, for pointing towards this. And then we just need, if you have a final word, Marcus.
Greger, sorry, Carolina here. I think
Carolina.
I think Patrick had a question, but he wrote that in the chat.
Oh yeah.
Is there time for a question for Patrick?
No, Patrick, you will have to save your question from for the session, the half hour after lunch. So.
Okay.
Because we want Liridona to have just as much time to present as the 2 previous speakers. So thank you again, Marcus, and we come.
Thank you, Gregor.
So welcome, Liridona, and I'd like you to just present yourself and start testing your equipment in terms of camera and sharing screen. It looks good this far. So now we just need to hear your voice. Unmute yourself, please. You're kind of muted. Do you hear me? Okay. So try to find the unmute. Thanks.
No, thank you. I didn't notice that I was muted. I'm a PhD researcher at Integrated Product Development and Design. So I've been doing research in the past 5 years in shared mobility services, and mainly focusing on light electric vehicles and small, basically micro mobility. But also I've been looking a lot into other shared services in general. I'm very interested in the overall system transition in transportation and how the design creates implications for our cities. So I am very curious in the topic of e-scooters, and I did a study in Los Angeles right when they happened. So I went to Los Angeles to study as part of Mistra SAMS work on shared mobility services, and it happened the same year that these scooters were launched, and it became a very curious topic. So I was like, I need to follow this. I will begin a little bit on I've been connected quite intensively in the topic of e-scooters in the last 3 years. So if we start to think that our cities are kind of a science laboratory, and we are trying to know exactly like how do we make this laboratory to be completely sustainable, we are looking at not just the number of vehicles that are occupying our cities, but we are also interested to look at any given point in time, and any given trip that people take is as ecological as possible, and also at the same time makes our cities more livable. We would also like to know a lot that how long the people could use these vehicles that are already existing in our existing infrastructures, and at the same time, in the last 5 years, especially in the last 2 decades in the transportation sector worldwide, we have seen a tremendous growth on services that are primarily given privately. But this is not the full picture of what truly sustainability means. We cannot just look at the ecological impacts of vehicles, but we also have to look at the social impacts and implications of accessibility and mobility services that are provided in our cities, and also how they even affect our larger landscape of cities and streets and many other variables. So it's quite a complex. I became curious because I was shocked at the accelerated growth of scooters compared to any other shared mobility service in the world until today. So we have a history of 70 years of shared services popping up every now and then in the world, but nothing has made it that fast compared to e-scooters. Mainly within 2 years, they became the fastest growing companies worldwide in the whole human history of corporations. So that's a really, really crazy factor, I think. But if we look at the e-scooters as isolated services, meaning that they are only concerned about their users, and the companies are providing really, really awesome, seamless services to their users, it means that we are really neglecting the larger socio-technical system upon which these services operate. And unfortunately, this kind of ecosystem here is not a flask, a lab flask, because it releases a lot of impacts. And so I think other researchers have done quite a lot of product life cycle impact, and research is still quite new in relation to electric scooters, but early results shown is clearly that the existing, the total life cycle impacts of e-scooters do not promise us significant environmental reductions in the overall transportation picture. But these are very early findings, and the main problems is that it's not the production of these scooters or not the use phase, but it's primarily the management of the fleets and the way currently the operations are organized in cities that make it really, really complex. Some studies that have been currently done in the scooters is mainly related to the user attitudes and perceptions, and a lot on the effects of other participants in the streets, and some substitution effects of if scooters are replacing other modes of transport and so on. But the studies in like scientific studies are really still very, very new. So to begin with, before I go into our study that we did in Los Angeles, is that generally speaking, services in the mobility sector are not without challenges and neglected considerations of the larger socio-technical system in which they operate, as I mentioned. And when we shop mobility, we are not just shopping the service, we are actually consuming spatial infrastructure for product placement. And so far in the transportation history, we have had the tendency either to have private transport or publicly offered services, but we haven't had privately offered services. So this is a change, and that means it has implications for the city governance in a lot of ways. And so far, electric scooter companies have had the tendency to infuse cities with a lot of the pushing the agenda for supporting micromobility as a more sustainable alternative. But this has been primarily done on the basis that the users of services have had strong support, and the users of e-scooter services are generally younger male adults, according to some recent studies. And I believe that e-scooters users and trips as a foundation for how cities should regulate these scooters are not the basis to regulate the scooters, because this, if we look at the history of automobility, it has told us very well that if we only listen to the users of the vehicles itself, we are going to neglect a lot of other stakeholders in the street. This is what I'm worried most in relation to e-scooters. This was a picture of the same day in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, when I was doing my study. This is the same region, and this is how the supply of scooters looked already in the last year in April 2019, basically. So I just look at different platforms, and this is like one that was transit, which integrated multiple platforms of different microservices, and the supply was horrendous during that time, before City of Los Angeles had made any strict regulations on the placement of scooters. But this is like same time, real time, the supply. So I think there was at least 15 scooters per block of the neighborhood that I could identify. And I was also doing the study visit on the field, so I observed exactly like how it was. So why this is a problem? Because we're talking about space and street sharing. In what I've noticed in our studies that public spaces and infrastructures are basically common spaces, and these are shared among many people living in cities. So the stakeholders of streets are way, way more diverse than what we have the stakeholders of the roads, which are primarily cars and trucks. Whereas on the sidewalk and the pedestrian areas, we have much more diversity of users that are not necessarily supporters of e-scooters. And if we look at the majority of e-scooter services have been deployed on such spaces which are already historically quite contested. I mean, the sidewalk is a historical problem. If you look at research on architecture, urban planning and design, I mean, it's a space that has been shrinking with years and years as roads took over and more other like vehicles and trucks and machines took over the spaces in cities. So it's quite an interesting aspect that I didn't really expect to explore, but it became more and more curious as I was getting to. And so my curiosity led, okay, if there is such a contestability, and if scooters are becoming such a debate, which happened in Los Angeles, especially when they were deployed in the summer, immediately after 2 months of launch, there was a lot of debates going on. And I was very curious to know what's the source of this debate, what's the source of this problem, and why there is such a huge discussion around the e-scooters. And I became quite intrigued to understand the non-user perspective of other stakeholders being involved in the topic of e-scooters. So I conducted a case study in Los Angeles between 2018 and 2019. I was twice in Los Angeles. First, I went just to explore and observe what's happening in the field. And the second time, I made a more structured, systematic case study analysis by having more primary data. And here I was curious to explore like how the present design of the e-scooters affects multiple actors, basically. And the main thing we did is that map the ecosystem of actors that have been involved directly and indirectly, and also examine the challenges of various stakeholders in relation to the operations and use of the service. And also in order to identify some implications for further scaling up of these services in our cities. If we look at the results, basically what e-scooters companies did is that they used this argument that we have a lot of users and we need to support the e-scooters. But when I looked at the whole ecosystem of actors involved and that have been in the discussion in the city regulation and so on, you have a huge picture of stakeholders that have been both negatively and positively affected by the e-scooter, especially the larger groups has been, as I mentioned, the non-user groups, which are specifically the senior citizens, the parents with strollers, children, people walking with crutches and cranes, and people with wheelchairs, and others that are not necessarily directly supporting these services because their space has been negatively affected. And this has been one of the main findings, that actually is that this is a multi-stakeholder conflict of interest. And that is also one of the reasons why it's been so difficult to regulate the e-scooters. So because so many actors are so involved in this system, and this comes mainly from one small thing, which is the concept of drop and park anywhere. That narrative was sent out to all e-scooter, like all e-scooter companies did that. And that's basically the basis for why it reached so much usage rates, because it's such a flexible gadget to use. So, but this comes with costs on other stakeholders participating in the streets, because meanwhile, we offer such great flexibility to the users of these services, we are also compromising the safety and other parameters of other stakeholders in the street. But the problem is that there are challenges with the whole system on itself. It's not just that operators are doing something terrible or that they are not figuring out the way. This is simply a complex system challenge that will not be just easily regulated, because specifically the city's infrastructures are not prepared for micromobility services, and that we could see clearly in the study. So if we look at the different stakeholders and their challenges, I could identify that, for example, even operators themselves have a lot of challenges. 3 of the main important ones we found was that they have loss of total control over the fleet of devices, and that the management of the fleet size and externalities come out a lot as a consequence of damaged devices. And there's operational problems leading to more new operators and competition trying to solve these, but then the problem just gets exuberated more and more. There's also challenges with the people working for these platforms, especially in Los Angeles. It's quite crazy with the idea of gig economy, because it's mainly the lowest of the lowest societal groups working for these as chargers and repair mechanics. So especially this was the case for the beginning, the first year of scooters, and then the company started changing its strategy, but it was really tough working conditions that were not supporting the employees, and the employees were also compromising on the safety. And because there was such a large number of workforce finding this attractive, then the competition grew. So then also hunting scooters further and further in the cities became more challenging, and most of the people are interviewed in this workforce were people who are driving super old fossil fuel based cars. And it was a very, very fanatic competition type of thing, to a point where there was also even danger accidents that I could myself witness during my research. So that's been a bit of a challenge, and this competitive nature of the people who took care of the scooters also made it that, due to time and the way the service was organized initially, made that the people also sometimes compromise safety because they were not paid to repair perfectly when scooters were in damage or so on. Then there is also user and non-user challenges. So I'm not interested only on users of services anymore, because I used to be very interested in exploring diffusion of services and looking at, oh, what users think, but I don't think that's anymore the way we should look at design. We should always take into account the non-user groups as well and how they affect it. And we see that for the users, there's quite high social expectations on the technology and platform functionality, which led also to why a lot of people did violent behavior against scooters, throwing them all over the place, because people expect them to be perfectly working. And initially they really didn't work. These type of ICT technologies are based a lot on sensor technology. So sometimes they do not operate well. And the ones who are mostly losing from this is users and cities maintenance groups. And for first-time users and non-users, this was perceived as a very complicated and threat to others. And there's a lot of perception of risk and safety in relation to the device, and especially other users' responsibility towards these services.
I would like to intervene just for a second.
Yes,
so
I know I'm going a bit running time.
Yeah, you have 3 more minutes. I will not throw people out, neither will Marta, but so you can either use those 3 minutes or open up for questions sooner or later.
Yeah, so I am almost done, and
Yeah,
I think I'll manage in 3 minutes, and I think it would be nice to have discussion for the later because it connects to the previous researchers as well.
Yes, good.
So these challenges, then I also was curious to know what's happening with the citywide governance and regulatory aspects, and for this, we also identified that lack of spatial designation for riding and dropping and parking scooters became a problem because of the various social groups who raised complaints against the scooters. And because in US, there is this concept of right of street that allows everybody to be equally treated, especially in the public space. And then there is lack of available permits for such business models. Clearly in the US, there's non-existing regulations for any of such type of economic organization. So the all closest that were is vending machines or sidewalk food stands. So this was a great opportunity for the operators to expand globally quite fast. And the added cost of city management, clearly that e-scooters have added a tremendous cost to the city's utilities because most of the companies have never reclaimed severely damaged scooters, and they do not really care about this. As I found in Los Angeles, there was so much supply of these scooters constantly coming up that nobody worried about the broken ones. And what happened was that there was also secondary businesses emerging, like homeless people in Los Angeles taking those damaged ones and selling parts, even sometimes shipping to China back. And I had quite interesting conversations with a lot of homeless people regarding scooters. They seem to be knowing quite well what's going on. What does this mean for regulatory and policy? I also found out that many regulations have been very difficult to design because most of the city governance has reacted on the go basis as operators have expanded because there was no such way of regulating, and most policy documents that exist are mainly focused on micromobility, but they do not specify how this should be organized, especially local and national levels. So there was no way to discuss with these operators that fast. And when I look at the whole policy documents in Los Angeles area, you can see a lot of contradictory designs in relation to how shared mobility services should be organized. What we find in conclusion is that basically e-scooters are a really multifaceted, multi-stakeholder interest issue, and the conflicting policy strategies that do not also take into account the non-user groups' perspectives in the regulation process are going to possibly become a really challenge for the future, especially because I've been following also new developments in these sectors, and there's way more micro vehicles coming to the market. Just to close up, one of the core, what this can teach us in relation to then the overall picture is that there's still a lot of space for innovation in this sector, and there's more and more coming, but reactionary policy is really not effective. So we need more forward-looking policy, and we need more participatory and co-creative ways of organizing between public and private stakeholders, especially including the non-user perspective in the process of regulation. So I think that's closes it all. I guess you can see a little bit more here that I won't mention. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Liridona. And it seemed like you also helped to raise some comments and questions. So thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Thibaut and Johan and Patrick and everybody else who commented in the chat. So we will keep these points from you to have a discussion starting at 1 o'clock. And Marta, would you like to say something about the technicalities of you just re-enter again, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to end the meeting now, but reopen it like 5 minutes before 1.
Will you save the chat? Have you saved the?
The chat. I saved the chat, and the chat is going to be available also.
Yeah, good.
as
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice lunch and see you at 1 o'clock.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
And especially the speakers, great job of yours.
Yes, thank you all. It was very interesting to listen. So happy to meet again in an hour.
Hmm?